It looks like, despite the more relaxed start time, our numbers have thinned a little bit. That may speak to a lot of fun having been had last night. It also may speak to the beautiful weather we're having here in Quebec City, quite at odds with the way it was in 2012 when we were last here with Astro, when the weather was different. Welcome this morning. I just want to remind you about a couple of program items. One is that at 1 o'clock this afternoon, once we've had a slightly shorter than usual period of time for lunch, Dr. David Kendall will be making a presentation about the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, UN COPUOS, very important body, and I would encourage everyone to come back and listen to what David has to say. He is chair of UN COPUOS. This is a mark of great distinction, and as a Canadian, he's put Canada in the spotlight in the area of the peaceful uses of outer space, which is where we want to be. And so I'd encourage you to be back at 1 o'clock for that. And then later on this afternoon, we have some posters that are part of the interactive presentation session. That will happen later in the middle of the afternoon, and there'll be a light reception accompanying that. I'd encourage you to stick around and talk with the students mainly students who are presenting posters. And then we have our gala reception and dinner tonight. So it's quite a full schedule, and I won't hold things up any longer. Jacques, if you'd like to come up, and Sylvain, and we'll get Sylvain's keynote underway.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So, yes, we'll get underway. We have the pleasure of having Sylvain Laporte, the president of the Canadian Space Agency, that has prepared a keynote presentation for us. So I think we'll just ask you to come and go over this presentation. I guess the crowd here is eager to hear what you want to say.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Jacques. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Jeff. Let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. I wasn't actually expecting an answer, but since you got us into that, all right, good. So starting with a little bit of humor is also good. So thanks for taking the time to come and listen to my keynote this morning. It's an interesting keynote because I'm going to start with a bang and actually address the elephant in the room. So yesterday, a few of you were very polite in making a few indirect digs with respect to the fact that space did not get any funding in this last year's budget. So I want to address that face on because at the CSA and within the government, we've addressed that and we're moving on. And I want to make sure that I convey the same message to you that I've conveyed to my troops, to my organization as we go forward. So for the students in the room and for those of you that may not follow the space file as closely as others in the room, last year was a rather banner year with respect to space because we held a number of consultations, both the CSA did and the Space Advisory Board, which is an advisory board to the minister that I report to. And we did quite a number of consultations, had a number of discussions with respect to what should the Canadian space program look like. So, following on those, there are a number of recommendations that the government needs to consider. We had hopes that maybe in the budget we would see some injection of new money for the space program, but that was not the case. So just to let you know that those of you that are experienced with the federal budget process, many of you have worked in government, some of you are military. It's a common practice to submit stuff for consideration by the government, but it's also very common not to receive any kind of funding. So in fact, it's more common not to receive anything than to get something. So, we kind of were disappointed with the result, but you shake it off and you move on. It's common happenstance to not get something in the budget. Of course, they can't satisfy all of the demands, and basically you acknowledge that and you go, okay, that was not our time. So let's roll up our sleeves and let's get to work. So that's the state of mind, at least in a space agency. So we have shaken it off and we're moving on. When I do look at what was funded in budget 2018, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm actually very, very happy that there was a massive injection of new funds in fundamental science. So fundamental science is one of the keystones of the space program, and seeing a very, very large investment of the government into our research capacity in Canada and making it grow is actually very, very good news for us. So quite happy that fundamental science got funding. It was time, and it's going to be very useful for what we do in the future. So budget 2018, although space itself did not get any funding, other than some funding for SATCOM and within the ISED portfolio, the whole fundamental science aspect of it is quite comforting. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't also say that the two budgets before then, we did get a substantial amount of money. So hopefully you are aware. If not, let me inform you. The budget 2016 and budget 2017 were actually very, very good to us. And we accumulated somewhere close to $500 million in the space program. And that's a very, very large sum of money. So that got us the ISS extension to 2024. If you're in the SATCOM business, it's also got us a new injection of funds in the ARTES program at ESA. It got us the development of the KeySat satellite that we alluded to yesterday, that talks about quantum key encoding and quantum computing. And it got us what NASA calls NEMO, which is a Mars orbiter mission as well. So we're quite happy with the support that we've been getting so far with respect to space, and we're looking at moving on and looking for future opportunities to secure more funding as we move forward. So, yes, disappointed, but we're not in a position here where we're going to be absolutely impacted to a point where we can't do and continue doing our business. So shake it off and move on. So that should be, since it is the way that we are looking at it, I hope I can count on your support in terms of helping us move the yardsticks around for future budget requests or future opportunities to do something good with the space program. So, learning from this year, we have to look at how we position stuff going forward. Fortunately, the space file is actually very well received in the Ottawa circles. We were not in a situation where we were actually pushing rope or anything of that nature. People understand space now, and that is very, very good progress for the space file. And we were well received, and our comments were actually very well understood by people decision makers in Ottawa going forward. So, that being the case, we always were able to count on the support of two champions, namely my minister, Minister Baines, who heads up the ISED portfolio, and Minister Duncan, who heads up the science portfolio. So we have in those two individuals some very, very strong champions of the space file, and we're counting on their support going forward and their counsel going forward in terms of our next steps. The SAB, the Space Advisory Board, is also looking at a series of new activities to help with the space program and to put themselves in a position where they can provide, extremely good counsel to the minister in terms of how we can take our file forward. The other thing we need to acknowledge is that, Budget 2018 kind of changed the landscape, and I think this is actually to our advantage. So there's a massive injection in fundamental science. And Canada, if you're not aware, is well known for doing extremely well with respect to research and development in an academic setting, right? We are top 3, I believe, maybe top 5 of the OECD countries in terms of our performance in that kind of a research environment. Where we're not necessarily good is taking that research and then innovating and commercializing. Then we kind of fall to the bottom of the pack with respect to relative rankings with our colleague countries in the OECD. So really, really good at that kind of academic research, not so good at taking it to an innovation, taking it to an operationalization, and then benefiting economically from that, right? So benefiting economically from that would go into, the commercialization area. So it's about increasing revenue and it's about exports, right? So with the big injection in fundamental science, the way I'm seeing things is that, we need to make sure that we can take that and innovate with it and get the economic growth for it. So that takes me to space. So we've completed a survey, the 2016 space program survey, which I believe we're going to issue very, very shortly. And Mary alluded to that yesterday during the DG panel. And I have a few key points I want to bring to your attention with respect to that survey, which kind of going to strengthen the point I'm about to make here. So in the 2016 survey, we've seen an increase in total revenues for the space program. So we're up to $5.5 billion of revenue in Canada. So that's quite substantial. What's also interesting is that from an R&D perspective, this industry, the space program, is very, very strong in R&D. In fact, you have spent $254 million in R&D. So this is industrial-funded research and development as opposed to government-funded research and development. So at $254 million, it's 9 times the average manufacturing rate, right? So it speaks of a very, very high intensity of R&D in our program, in our industry. And that sticks us out from the rest of the pack, right? We are up there in terms of very R&D intensive industries. And from a commercialization perspective, we've doubled the commercialization revenues to increase now to $123 million in 2016. So that's incredible. We've doubled the commercialization revenue dollars. So that kind of points to the fact that we can take science, we can innovate with it, and by commercializing it, we can get the economic gain, right? So from an export perspective, we saw the largest single annual increase of the last 5 years. So exports from an economic perspective are really, really good, right? So that's what the government is striving for. So let's look at building up our industry, getting increase in revenues, and getting them to export where they can. So space tends to have the right profile to be able to benefit from this massive injection of money that was put in fundamental science, right? Because the missing elements and looking at helping to change Canada's track record with respect to innovation and commercialization. So start with a very large injection in fundamental science, and then let's look at how we can improve innovation and get the economic gain from that. So I think space is absolutely well positioned to be contributing very much to that equation. In fact, I'd venture to say that, space is Canada's innovation engine. I think space can actually contribute greatly to the equation of trying to drive science and turn it into economic gain. So space is one of the innovation contributors in Canada, but certainly I think we can, looking at our numbers, we can position space to be one of the key drivers of innovation and leveraging what we get from the fundamental science investments. But we also need to acknowledge that the government has also invested heavily in innovation in the past. So just last year and 2 years ago, just to name a few, we announced the Innovation and Skills Plan that gave us the SIF. It gave us the Innovation Solutions Canada, to name a few. Other than that, we've invested into the Supercluster program. That's looking at quite a bit of investment in new technologies as well. So, you know, if we're looking at positioning space as being an innovation engine, we also need to acknowledge the fact that, other than the fact that there was a lot of investment in innovation, what makes space stick out from the rest of the pack with respect to innovation? So I'm back to our track record of being very heavily dependent on R&D. We need to continue with that trend and having both a lot of new investments in research and development, both from a university perspective and from an industrial perspective, and then continuing to do what we do, and maybe in a dialed up fashion with respect to taking that science and innovating with it to get the economic gain. So if we're going to continue that way and make space stand out in this innovation forum, it would be very, very useful for us to learn from you in terms of how you, in your own capacity, whether you're working in a university doing research or whether you're working in industry and doing some of the more mission-focused work that I'll label innovation, we'd like to hear from you, right? Many of you, after the budget, have asked me, okay, so, you know, we got nothing, so what do we do now and how can we help? One of the great ways that you can help is if you engage with us in a continuous dialogue with respect to how you see your contribution to that equation of transforming fundamental science into innovation and getting an economic gain from it. So those of you in industry are quite familiar with that play. This is not a new model. But what would be very useful for us is to understand how you play in that picture and how you have contributed with real life examples. So I encourage you to engage us in that dialogue. We need to understand those key elements with real life examples so that we can strengthen the case that space requires that special consideration as an innovation engine. Right? I think the pieces kind of fit together and from a jigsaw puzzle perspective, but what we need now are the 4 real examples. So Mary Préville, my DG of policy, could not be here today. She had to return to Ottawa for some pressing business. And she's aware that I'm going to do this, but not to the extent that I am about to do this. So I'd like you to use Mary as a contact point with respect to that. And her email address is mary.préville, 2 L's, @canada.ca. She's going to be so surprised when she starts seeing your emails. But it's going to be very important for us to understand how you contribute to this innovation engine so that we can build a case and strengthen the space program's case for doing just that. So let's engage in that discussion. And by the way, if you do take me up on my offer and look at helping us, I'm interested in what you have been doing so far, but also just as interested about how you see things evolving. Are you going to be doing more of that kind of stuff? Is your company looking at investing more into R&D or doing more innovation? Are you looking at more spin-outs or spin-ins with respect to some of the space technology that you have developed? So hopefully I'm starting to paint a picture of what I'm looking for, and I'm appealing to you to engage into that dialogue, because I think it will enrich the conversation that we now need to have with government. So if you were wondering how you can help, that is a clear way of how you can help us go forward. So, that being said, you've heard through the DG panel, if you were there yesterday, that we still have money, we still are operating, we still have missions, and we're still going in a frenzied way through the approval and the issue of quite a number of contracts and AOs and everything else. So life goes on, right? And in fact, we've kind of dialed up that those elements that have the biggest bang for the buck with respect to working with industry and working with academia. So, we spoke yesterday very quickly of some of the programs that we're still running, and I can assure you that we're working very, very hard to continue with, programs like the STDP, the EOADP, in the academic forum, more of the FAST and the Stratos. We're dialing up those programs. We've had working teams, working groups with many of you in terms of how we can improve the delivery of those things and make them more efficient as well, so that we get the biggest bang for the buck. We've strengthened, what I call our business development capability. So, we've always had conversations with leaders in other countries, but they were more governmental type conversations. We've kind of switched that around now. So when I meet with some of my colleagues from other space agencies, or when I meet with industry in other countries, we now have turned those conversations into a business development opportunity. So I get to meet, some very important people in companies like SpaceX and Lockheed and whatever. And the conversation goes a lot like, well, how many Canadian companies do you have in your supply chain? And how can we have more? What are you interested in doing, and how can Canadian industry, Canadian research institutes help you? So we flipped those conversations now. And I can assure you, as I mentioned in the panel, we get a great reception from that. And it has led to a number of B2B, business-to-business events. So when we go international now, we always do B2B events, and many of you have participated in that. And we've had a few good leads coming out of those events. We did a mutual exchange of small to medium enterprises with Germany. So we took a number of Canadian firms over to Bremen, and then they did the reciprocal. The Bremen folks came to Canada, and we had great discussions with respect to that. We took Sierra Nevada, that is building a Dream Chaser. We brought them to Ottawa, had a 2-day rapid dating kind of format where they presented their plans. They're very interested in working with Canadian firms and internationalizing their supply chain, and it also has led to a number of opportunities. So we now do that as a matter of course. So when I do say engage with us with respect to how space becomes an economic or an innovation engine, it also informs the discussions that I need to be having with respect to these business development opportunities. So by engaging more with us in terms of where you plan on going, what are your business opportunities and whatnot, there's a very good chance that, at least from an international perspective, we could open some doors. That's what we do in a big way now. Now that's an industry and an academic market opening or business development kind of activity. We also do a reciprocal thing within the federal government, so from an intramural perspective. So many of you understand that we often get a number of missions through the CSA, and those missions actually serve another federal government department, like agriculture or environment or natural resources. And through our discussions with them last year, as we were looking at the space program, we discovered a number of things that kind of puzzled us. So in those departments, they have a very large number of engineering and scientific folks, right? So you got to figure that, and at environment, there's a lot of climatologists, there's a lot of climate change people, there's a lot of research taking place within natural resources. So replicate that from a science perspective, across maybe a dozen or so science-based departments in the federal government. So we've been talking to them, and they've been users of space, over the last few years. And last year, what we discovered was quite surprising in that many of them said, well, we've got this team that always plays with you at the CSA, but there's tons of us that think we may have something for space, but we don't know who to call. We don't know who to talk to. And many of us even don't understand space. So maybe space is a solution, we just don't know about it, right? So that kind of surprised us because we thought we had a good relationship. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. We have a good relationship, but clearly we didn't have as strong as a relationship as we probably need. So last week I announced within the CSA walls the establishment of a brand new team. We call it the Strategic Relations Team. It's like an internal business development team. So it's headed by my VP, and we've put senior policy people, technical people, communications people, and big data people on this team. So that now we're going to approach these departments in a business development capacity. So we are looking at now educating the various scientists within the government with respect to what space can do for them. We're also going to make sure that they now understand there's a 1-800 number that you can call, not figuratively, but figuratively, not for real, but they know now who to contact. And because we're now involving policy and communications and other folks from a non-technical perspective, we're also looking at elevating what is currently today a technical conversation limited to, an assistant deputy minister level. So those of you that understand government, unless you go to the DM level or the minister level, things don't get a whole lot of visibility. So we're looking through this team at bringing visibility into each one of those departments at the deputy minister and the minister level. That's why we've got policy people on this team. So why am I explaining all of this to you, and why do I believe that this strategic relations team is important, although it's intramural? From there, I'm very optimistic that we're going to identify new mission requirements. And we're going to be working with them to secure the funding for those mission requirements, for those new mission opportunities. And that means more work and more contracts out to industry and to research organizations. So, we're approaching this from an opening the market perspective internationally, and we're approaching it from an intramural perspective as well. So this business development pillar has taken great shape at the CSA. And we're also, it's not because we didn't get budget money that we're not looking at future opportunities as well. Gilles mentioned yesterday we're heavily involved with NASA on the exploration side with respect to the Gateway and the Moon. We've also held quite a number of scientific community conferences last fall at the CSA on atmospheric sciences, on I think it was Earth-Sun, and then on the medical side as well, where we brought in 100 to 150 scientists, and we asked them, okay, what's important and what are the opportunities in your area of specialty? And many of them came back. in a more of a small scale, informal, decadal survey kind of fashion. But these communities came back to us with a prioritized list of things that were important to them. Some of them came back and said, here are 6 missions in order of priority to our community. Some have came back and said, well, we're not going to give you a list of missions, but these are the scientific subject areas that we'd like you, the CSA, to concentrate on. So we've gone to you and you've come back to us, and now we understand the priorities with respect to these things. And from there, we're now able to make headway with respect to selecting some missions that we'd like to invest in. So in the past, the CSA, behind closed doors and maybe with a few discussions on the outside, we kind of picked what we wanted to invest in. Well, we've turned that around. Now you are telling us what the priorities are, and we are there to support that, right? So we're now working on those missions in the order of priority that were provided to us. So I think that's absolutely great progress, and it leads to a lot more transparency with respect to how investments are made at the CSA. So we're also doing work on Earth observation. So we're not content with the fact that, Gennady, how many days? 175 days before launch. We're not content with the fact that we're launching 3 new state-of-the-art Earth observation satellites. We're actually working on the generation that will come after that, right? So design end of life for RCM is 2025. It's 2018. It's 7 years away. If we have to build something and build something new, it's time we get on with it. So we're actually now working with the various departments who use Earth observation data in terms of identifying their requirements and trying to map out what the follow-on to RCM could look like in 2025. So we're very proactive, just in case we need to build something. We're going to make sure that we're going to be in a good position before we reach end of life and we start, maybe having problems with some of the satellites up there. And we spoke yesterday about space medicine. So it's one of the areas that NASA has invited us to take a leadership role in recognition of the fact that Canada has done extremely well with our life sciences research on the ISS, and they recognize the clinical research strength of Canada. So they've kind of invited us to look at making a proposal with respect to what we could contribute more substantially for the Moon and Mars missions with respect to space medicine. So we've held conferences with experts. We've done a national roundtable activity looking at getting opinions from the various medical experts. And as was mentioned yesterday, it resounded, and there's quite a lot of interest in looking at what Canada can contribute in those areas. So these are all new potential activities that we're working on, and I think it's quite interesting and encouraging that we're in that position. So all in all, hopefully you're starting to recognize that the CSA is taking on more and more of a leadership role and not just a program delivery role. So of course, program delivery is our bread and butter. That's what we're strong in. That's what we're recognized for. But we now need to play more of a leadership role and more of an integrator role so that we can be of a better value add in supporting research and industry. So that's why we exist, is to make sure that you are successful. So as I look at what kind of leadership role we can play, clearly we're into the world of being an integrator, right? As you know, we don't do stuff inside the CSA, right? So when the CSA was formed, it was very clear that the mandate was you are not a research agency a la NRC type, and thou shalt push the development and the engineering and all of that to industry and to academia, and that's what we do. So I see us as having that integrator role, and I think that's the biggest value add that we can bring from a leadership perspective to the space community. And when I talk about being an integrator, I talk about us being a convener. right? So different sub-roles under integrator. So being a convener is something that we do. We bring people together, helping to solve problems, right? Also what we do. Being a motivator and being an enabler, right? So key roles to play as an integrator, and you'll see us taking more and more space, okay, that was a pun, more and more room in that space going forward. And if you think that's kind of strange, hopefully you don't, but if you do think it's kind of strange, I'd like to just point out the fact that Australia announced the fact that it was establishing its space agency. It did that last year, and they just got the equivalent of about $50 million of initial funding to get them started. Australia was in a situation where Canada was before the agency was formed, where a number of departments were all playing in space, and none of it was coordinated or integrated. And they kind of realized that, you know, they have a sum of the parts kind of a situation here, and they weren't leveraging the benefits of bringing everything together inside an agency and asking that agency to play a leadership role. So they were not involved, for example, in capacity development programs, student programs, and stuff of that nature, right? So those are value add activities that we bring to the space program. They could not engage in that because every department was focused on a particular mission, and no one was actually looking at bringing it all together and leveraging the volume and the critical mass. So that's what we now are looking at ensuring we do in the bestest way possible at the agency. So when I look at all of that, despite the fact I started this keynote with a bit of a negative because I wanted to address the elephant in the room, we've shaken it off. It's behind us and we've moved on, right? So, you know, from a very bright perspective, you know, I see the future looking very, very good for the space program. What we do is absolutely critical and essential to our country, to our economy, and to Canadians out there. We've got a value proposition that resounds very strongly, and you know, I'm absolutely committed to making sure that we continue to have a very strong Canadian space program going forward. So I'd just like to end with a quote by Gene Cernan. Gene was an American astronaut, and he was the last man who actually walked on the moon. So he basically said, whatever it takes to be the best is what it will take to get you into space. So let's keep being the best out there. Thank you very much. Des questions? On a peut-être des questions? Oui? Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions.
So I would like to just comment myself before we go. So I think, so thank you for addressing the big questions, talking to us honestly. I think the message of, you know, life goes on, and we roll up the sleeves and we continue to work and we don't give up. I think that's, I'm quite sure the message is well received. We were having this Monday a workshop on space system resilience. I like to think that this community is resilient, and we'll do just that, just move on and continue. I think it will be important that we keep a dialogue very open and ongoing. And you alluded to some things that you think should be done to continue to have the space sector thrive for the best. So yeah, that's my comment, and thank you again for the presentation, for the keynote. So we will go with questions. Okay, I think there's one question from.
I'm hoping I'm not the only one with questions today. Sir, I'd also like to thank you for addressing the elephant in the room. But I'm confused about one thing. Just one thing bothers me. I write about the space industry. I get invites to about 20 conferences in Canada, the United States, and Europe every year, most of which I can't go to because, well, I'm poor, and because I have even less time than I have money. So I gotta decide where I'm going to go. And a lot of these conferences come with venture capital people who want to meet people with new ideas. And a lot of these conferences come with NASA participation, and a lot of conferences come with ESA participation, and a lot of these conferences come with SpaceX participation. And my question to you is, what in your value proposition will make me come to you first if I want to get into space? Even better, what will make me come to you fifth? What makes you more important than these other 19 or 20 events and all these other people around the world that we should be talking to?
Because you like us? You know, Chuck, that's a very, very interesting and very philosophical question for sure.
I wouldn't say philosophical. I would say if I go to a Silicon Valley meeting about space, I get to meet with venture capitalists. I have a chance to make money or to gain money.
Yeah. But then Silicon investors have conversations at the level of investing into a company, and the company has a very specific value proposition. So this morning I spoke more about, you know, a strategic perspective of the space program as a whole. And I would not take the space program as a whole to VCs in Silicon Valley. So that's what makes you're answering your question a difficult way. But what I do interpret from your question, though, is, you know, what makes the space community in Canada unique, that it will draw attention and that it will draw investment.
That's fair comment.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'll go back to a bit of what I said yesterday at the panel. Our reputation is made, right? We have one of the best reputations in the world for delivering, and people love Canada, right? So we've earned that reputation through our strength, through being able to deliver on all of the commitments that we've made so far. That's a track record that is inviolable for many countries and many industries. As we all know, there's usually a lot of delays on an international mission, and we've been very, very good at making sure that Canada is not the source of those delays. So when people look at forming a team and they want to bring together a number of winners on that team, they think of Canada. Now, we haven't been that good in communicating that to Canadians out there. And we haven't also been very good at communicating the impact and the benefit of what we do. We spoke a bit about that yesterday, right? So are Canadians genuinely interested in the technology on that, on that satellite that we're putting up there? Or are they interested in the fact that it's going to help scientists figure out why, snow mass is eroding in the north, and what the impacts that would have on our weather patterns and our quality of life? I'd say it's the latter and not the former. So we need to look at how we market ourselves so that we do attract the necessary attention. We've got it. We've got the story. We've got the value proposition. We've got an inviolable history and heritage in space, and we're all positioned for what's coming up. Quite a number of companies, of industry, are very well positioned to commercialize space. They're going to be winners. And a number of our research colleagues are extremely well positioned to take us to the next level of science that we're going to need tomorrow. So great heritage, very well positioned for the future. Let's start bragging about it, right? Let's start telling the story to the public and to the influential people out there so that they understand the gem that we have here and look at nurturing it.
I think that's a very fair answer. I'd just like to shamelessly plug myself. If anybody wants to learn a little bit more about advocacy and space outreach, I'm running a session in the Garneau room. All the stuff we've been doing wrong in the past, maybe we'll get it right next time. About 10:30.
Let me correct that, Chuck. You said all of the things that we're doing wrong. It's not necessarily we've been doing wrong, right? We may not have been doing it with the right intensity going forward. So let's dial up that intensity because we've got the story. Yeah. Okay.
Marc Boucher, Space Q. My question revolves around this new internal strategic team. My understanding of what you said is you're going to be working, providing the 1-800 line, if you will, for the other government departments, bringing in space policy, this and that. What's different about this new strategic team than what you've been doing in the past? Because it's already been part of your mandate to actually do this. So what's the difference?
Okay, so good question. We have been engaged and we have very strong and very deep relationships with scientists in every one of the, what I call the user departments, and there are 14 of those departments, by the way. We do meet every 3 months at the deputy minister level to talk about space, so that's also a good thing. Mark, what I would say is in the past, those conversations have been held at the technical working level, right? And I would receive an investment request to invest in this particular technology, this particular gizmo, because it's going to be really, really important to environment. And when I arrive, I play the challenge function with my folks. So tell me, who believes that this is important in that department? And, I would get the name of some manager of an engineering team or a scientific team, whatever. And I would say, well, look, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars of investment. I'd like to know that this is a priority of the department. And we struggled with that because within, science-based departments, a lot of the technical stuff doesn't go up the chain. So we could be potentially putting ourselves in a position that we could invest in something that may not have been the priority of that minister or that deputy minister. And we couldn't get access to the big folks out there because it's the culture to keep technical stuff at the technical level. But I wasn't happy with that. So we tested a few of those opportunities, and we realized that there was merit, in fact, of helping the various departments to bring those conversations to the policy level, to the very senior levels within that department, so that they appreciate how space contributes to their mandate, right? So conversations like that were not happening because they were at the low-level technical level. So that's why bringing in very senior folks on this strategic relationship team, it has the objective of escalating space discussions within the department. So that's what's going to be different about it, right? I wouldn't want anyone to believe that we did not have strong relationships before. We had them, very, very strong relationships. But again, many of them were pockets of individuals. We need to address the bigger scientific picture in each one of these departments as well.
Hi, I'm Hugh Bobmore, Honeywell Aerospace. So thank you for your remarks this morning, Sylvain. It's always nice to know what CSA is up to, and thank you for reassuring us about the budget situation as well. My question is, you referred to CSA taking on an integrator role rather than a strictly program delivery role, and I was wondering how you would square CSA's role in space astronomy in a new paradigm of being less about program delivery and more about integration.
Okay, well, thanks for that question. And you make me realize that I need to clarify something here. So when I talk about an integrator role, I'm not talking about a technology integrator role, right? We contract that out, right? An integrator role from a leadership perspective, right? So we're not going to be in the business of taking over systems integration from the industry, for sure. So thanks for making me make that clarification. So your question was about?
Well, if you're going to other government departments and asking them what can space do for you, what other government department is responsible for space astronomy?
Okay, so the CSA plays that integrator role in terms of also making sure that we support the 14 departments that use space, right? But we, as a department ourselves, we have a mandate and we are responsible for things that are unique to us. So space astronomy is one of those things. That belongs to the CSA. It doesn't belong to any other department, right? So we are the owner of that, just like we're the owner of the exploration program, okay? So no other department gets involved with astronauts. We're the only one, or rovers, planetary rovers, or whatever. So that all belongs to us. So we are the home for that. And we're not looking at letting that go, and we need to provide the leadership there.
Hi, I'm Philip Ferguson with University of Manitoba. I hold an industrial research chair there. And one of the things that is really important to us in academia, and you touched on this, about the importance of us to continue innovating and bring that research from basic research in universities to commercialization. One of the things that we struggle with a little bit in academia, and it's getting to be a little bit louder, I'll say, these days, is that there's a lot of pressure on us to train HQP, the highly qualified personnel, and build up a workforce in Canada. But what we're starting to get pushback now is we're saying, great, we're training all these HQP, we don't have a lot of places to put them. Right, so people are graduating, they don't have the jobs that they would like to see in Canada. I wondered if you could take a few minutes and just address how you see CSA's role in helping us to position all these HQP that we write about in all of our proposals.
I thought of a number of things that I should not say. That's always bad when your train of mind goes there. So, I mean, we do have quite a number of programs, as you mentioned, to help you build those up, right? FAST and Stratos, and we've done some terrific work with respect to bringing students to international conferences and exposing them to the space world and whatever else. The CubeSat competition, you know. So we're going to be engaged in building capacity. At this point, we haven't been really focused too much on how we place them afterwards, because we've got other programs in the government whose job it is to do that, right? So admittedly, is there a gap or an issue that is space specific that, you know, we should be attentive to? Honestly, that hasn't percolated to my ears at this point. You're the first I hear that alludes to that problem. I get the opposite picture, that folks who have and have been able to get experience in the space domain get hired rather quickly, and we don't have a problem of employing them. The issue, and I thought that's where your question was, you know, because many of them are going out of country, as opposed to staying in Canada. So that is a known challenge for us, but it's a known challenge in every industry, not space, not just space. We're not unique in that perspective. But hard for me to answer your question because I haven't really put a lot of thought in it, because I didn't know or understand that it was a big problem. We get a lot of good positive reception when we build capacity. So I'm going on the assumption that you provide valuable experience and they get hired. If that's not the case, and if my assumption is wrong, we need to talk, and we need to talk quickly, because we need to make sure that loop is closed. Now, the question of hiring students and all of that is not a responsibility of the CSA, but if I can bear some influence because there's a particular space issue there, I'll gladly take that on. Trust me, it's very, very important to me that we build la relève, the succession, right? So fully committed 100% in that area. So let's talk some more. Unfortunately, I can't answer your question directly, but okay.
This is sort of bookending a comment of Chuck's. I'm actually here for the money too, just at a different end of money hunting. I'm hoping to cultivate donors for a nonprofit effort I'm involved with. It has to do with STEM education. I'm going to leave that aside for a second because of something that came up with Todd yesterday. There used to be something called the International Space Apps Challenge, hosted by NASA. It's a very loosely organized but very global event, a weekend hackathon. I participated twice in Tokyo. These are treasured experiences for me. I think it's the same for an awful lot of other people. This year, I waited for the invitation. I waited for the announcement. It usually happens in April. They usually start preparation in February. Silence. Website wasn't dead, but there was no activity on it. The Bolden era at NASA has passed, the time when you could talk about education as a huge priority for a national space program in the US. Seems to be kind of in eclipse now. Is that something that CSA could take up, that kind of international event, public outreach, again, preoccupation of Chuck's, because it seemed like that kind of thing, the diplomatic value is pretty huge. The education value can be pretty good. It doesn't really solve the problem of the previous questioner, because apparently you've got a surfeit of good people coming out of the astro and aero programs here in Canada. But I'll leave you with that. It was just basically a weekend hackathon, people building little hardware projects, mostly software, sometimes media. And as you know, the countries I go to, like Ecuador, Kenya, Indonesia, they were just like 2% of the total outreach from that amazing program. Is that something that CSA, does that fit into your integrator leadership role at this point?
Yes, clearly from an interest perspective. Now we have also participated in those NASA forums, and we did so last year in terms of challenging Canadians with some big data applications, and we got a ton of interest from Canadians with respect to those hackathons, and they were very, very popular, and we look to continuing to do those. NASA has paused. We're waiting to see what happens, just like you are. You know, I am interested in looking at whether or not we can do some Canadian unique hackathons, whether international or national. And those are parts of the conversations that we're having now in terms of dialing up our outreach in our STEM program. Currently, they're not on the short-term list because in the short term, we've concentrated a lot of our STEM and outreach activities to David Saint-Jacques, a Canadian astronaut who's going to launch to space. And we've put together quite a number of interesting outreach and education programs targeted to school children, K to 12. So the resources and the effort went towards that because that's where we believe we'll have the most influence. There's nothing like when you have one of your nationals on the International Space Station to garner interest. So we're going to take the opportunity of equipping teachers with quite a number of educational materials to benefit from the fact that they've got an astronaut in there. So we're not quite ready yet to announce what those programs are going to be, because we're also, in order to leverage resources and capacity, we're partnering with quite a number of other organizations that are specialized in education, specialized in developing STEM opportunities as well. So we are looking at dialing up those activities in the coming year. David will be up there for his 6 months or maybe a bit more. So throughout that period, there will be a very intense space education number of activities. And that's where the focus is going to be. So not to say that in the medium term or the longer term that we'll go back to hackathons and when things get back to normal, that we won't look at trying different things. And because we've had success there, it's one of those areas that we do want to pursue. So short term, probably you're not going to get a whole lot of satisfaction. But longer term, medium term, you know, potential is there for us to continue down that stream.
Thank you.
can you, I don't know.
I don't have a question, but I'll just make a note to what was just said. The International Space Apps Challenge is on. It was announced not too long ago, October 19th to the 21st. And from what I understand, at least Toronto is going to be involved, and Ottawa and Waterloo might be involved. So if you're a student and you want to be involved, get involved. If you're a company and you want to help support it, get involved.
Well said. Thanks for that. Thanks, Mark.
It's precisely 10 o'clock. So thank you very much. I want to ask you to join me in thanking Sylvain for this very interesting keynote.
So it's a full room now. Welcome, everybody. I didn't have a chance to welcome at the beginning of Sylvain's presentation. Thank you very much, Sylvain. I have one important thing to say regarding dinner tonight. We have at least one person registered for the conference who has a very bad allergy to seafood. During the reception, there will be a scallop hors d'oeuvre that will be served. So just a word to everyone, if you haven't told us about any food allergies or other concerns that we ought to know about, please make sure you do. And if we've already been told and it's really serious for you, don't hesitate to remind us. We'll give you, if it's a food thing for dinner tonight, we'll give you something to give to your server, to give that server a special reminder that you're one of the people who we have to be particularly careful with. So that's about it. I remind you again about David Kendall's keynote presentation at 1 o'clock. David's over there. Looking forward to that. And the interactive presentations will happen around 3:30 this afternoon, light reception. And please ask the presenters some questions and make them feel important, because they really are. And if I were presenting at this conference, I'd want to make it an interactive presentation, because I'll have as much time with you as you want to have with me. And it's not just going to be 15 minutes and 3 minutes for questions, which is good. But if you have someone who's really interested in what you have to say, with a poster, you've got as much time as you both want to have. So take advantage, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks. One other thing, everybody. This is just a little icing on the cake. At the moment, there's actually a spacewalk that's going on right now. So our Freeman technician is going to put it up on the screen so we can watch it while you're having your conversation. Thanks.